I have a question. Do you know the history, background, and foundations of what you believe? I sure didn't, but I've been on a bit of a journey figuring some of those things out. And I think it might influence a little bit about what you believe and if you really should believe it and the fruits that come out of it just by knowing the history of it. I want to try to be able to dispel some things that maybe get thrown out there and also show some things that you probably don't know about that haven't been talked about and have influenced, if you're a Western Christianer, Western Christian, or especially in America, that it's changed the way we believe things, the way we see God, and it's changed the way we have seen the end time and eschatology, and it really changes the way that you live your life. And so it's actually really important what you believe. And I shared in the previous episode just kind of how changing one belief, especially about end times, eschatology, stuff like that, and essentially on dispensationalism, as we like to call it, how it changed my life, how it really made a big difference in my life. And I feel like it was a key and created just a domino effect of being able to see God truly as good and as amazing and as loving and also as righteous, but under a clearer picture of what that really means. And it's changed the way I love people. It's changed the way I live my own life. And so I want to be able to share some of that. But today, I'm not going to get into the actual beliefs of dispensationalism. I think in our next episode, we're actually going to get into that. We're going to talk about what is dispensationalism. What I have found is that a lot of Christians don't know exactly what dispensationalism is. Like when I talk to them, I say, yeah, dispensation. They go, I don't know what that is. What is that actually? And what they've been taught it, they've been, educated in it, they've heard pastors talk about it, and they maybe believe a lot of beliefs from dispensationalism, but they don't even know what it really promotes. It's just taught as if it's fact. It's just given to people. And even if you're not from a background or denomination or church or whatever belief system that teaches that, I found that, we interact with many other Christians. We hear many other people, whether it be on TV or online or just in conversations with people. I think that's a big part of talking about, oh man, I hope, Jesus comes back really soon or stuff like that. And we pick up theology and eschatology just from being around this, even if you maybe don't profess to it. So you might actually believe some of these things that you don't even know just because you just heard it said and it, oh, okay, and so you believe it. So we'll get into that and I'll actually describe what dispensationalism really is, what it actually teaches, and why I have some problems with it. I shared why it's changed my life in a positive way to shift my beliefs, but we'll get into that. So today, I just want to go through a really big part of history that has influenced America, it's influenced you and I, and now the world, and probably why we should take a closer look at it. It's gotten pretty popular here recently in some conversations with people. But I want to talk about dispensationalism. Where did it come from? How did it begin? Now, I'm not going to go too deep. Maybe we'll probably talk about this in the actual beliefs, but dispensationalism as a whole was not predominantly spoken about in the early church. Yes, there are, when you read, I just went through a class here recently on dispensationalism, so it's pretty fresh in my mind. And, yes, there are some church fathers that talk about periods of times, the way God related to people, and they'll note on that. And so then it'll say, well, see, there was dispensationalism. But a big part of that is dispensationalism and rapture theology are tied together really close. And you don't really see rapture theology in the early church for years and years and years and years. And we can get into that. That's a whole big conversation. But there you can see different people throughout the times, mentioning, kind of having some of these ideas. But generally, most people will see this rapture, the secret rapture as it's called sometimes, and dispensationalism really becoming popular with John Nelson Darby, right? So, and Darby, kind of really pioneered a lot of this. you actually do some research, and there were other people probably before him talking about this. He wasn't like the main person who came up with it, but I would say probably popularized it. And so, Darby came up with this idea and belief. In dispensationalism, it sees, God relating to people in different dispensations, which just mean periods of time, and relating to them under the law or under grace or under the conscience, or, we'll get into that. The big thing that a lot of this belief hinges on is, the rapture. Because God related to Israel under the law, and then Jesus came, and now we're under this church age or grace, and we're in the parentheses. But he's got to get the church out of here so that he can finish the law and finish the time of the Jews. And so he's got to get the church out of here. Well, how do you get to that place? Well, you got to get the church out of here, and the rapture takes care of that problem. That it takes the church out of here and he finishes off his time with the Jews. That's where that came from. And so Darby actually came up with, oh yeah, we're going to be caught up in the air. Jesus returns, excuse me. And that gets the church out of here. And it kind of made the whole thing work. And I'm not going to go too deep into that. There are some people, you'll read, they say, well, a girl had a vision and a dream and she saw the rapture. And that's where all this came from. And, really, actually, when I read her very vision that she talks about, I really don't see a whole lot of rapture theology coming out of that. And so I don't know if I totally buy into that. I really think it kind of came about in some of these beliefs with Darby. And I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I don't think that's what I want to focus on. The short amount is that Darby, came up with this belief and separated from the churches that he was in, and created the Plymouth Brethren, right? And that's kind of what they called. And not too long afterwards, the Plymouth Brethren actually split and made the Exclusive Brethren and the Free Brethren and all this thing. And Moody came out of the other group, but the Exclusive Brethren continued on. And we'll hear about them a little bit more. And they held to dispensationalism, the rapture, all this stuff like that. And so, and now, sadly, you look at the Exclusive Brethren now, and they probably wouldn't like me saying this, but it's basically just like a cult nowadays. You can listen to a lot of testimonies of people in this that have come out of it, and they're like, it's a cult. It's very restrictive. It's very stern. It's very harsh, and it's, this little group, and it's kind of cultish. So I don't know. That's not a good fruit that's come out of it. But whatever the fact, I'm not going to spend too much time on that. That was in the early 1800s. Right? That's when that came. This all came about early 1800s, really kind of grew, kind of started to spread, became pretty popular in the Plymouth Brethren. But then we really see in the late 1800s, it just explodes. And in the early 1900s is when the Scofield Bible comes out. And that's when it just becomes wildly popular all over the place. And then we see theological seminaries adopting it and teaching it, and now here we are today. So also keep that in mind. We've got almost 2,000 years of Christian history. This is actually fairly young for it to come about only in the early 1800s and then finally become really popular in the 1900s. Pretty young belief. So that I'm not a fan of that. Some people don't have a problem with that. Pretty young. But here's the thing. Let me make this statement. All right, now that I've had my spiel on all of that, there's something that happened, like Scofield in his Bible popularized and brought about this belief into all sorts of different realms and areas. If Scofield had not made his Bible and had not popularized this belief, I don't know if dispensationalism and rapture theology would have ever taken hold. Maybe it would have. We don't know. But ultimately, it was kind of just a small sect. It was just a group. And yes, they grew pretty good. But I don't think it would have really gotten into mainstream Christianity. If it wasn't for C.I. Scofield, we probably wouldn't have seen it take hold so powerfully. So that's an interesting thought. Who is this C.I. Scofield? And I want to talk about Scofield because this is important that we understand the history of how this came about and where our beliefs came from. And I want to actually talk to you about the life of C.I. Scofield and why there's some problems here and why I see some issues. So here's the deal. C.I. Scofield, you can just Google him or look him up on YouTube, and there's all sorts of crazy theories, and I want to actually go through them. There's all sorts of theories that he was funded by the Rothschilds. He was funded by Zionists, and it's all a big conspiracy theory. And there's all this stuff going around about him, and it's this big bad stuff. We'll get into that if I actually have found some of those proofs. Can we find a paper trail? Can we find that? And I might not spend as much time on that as you think, because I really just want to find the proof in his life. And we are literally preaching out of what this man has taught. So let's look at his life, let's look at his fruit and some of those problems. And when I went into this, I wanted to have a really open mind. So mind you, you can watch lots of videos on this, but I'm just going to tell you, I had no idea who Scofield was. I didn't know any of the history, and I see these things accusing him of being a liar and a charlatan and a heretic and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay. And when I went into it and I started doing the research, I said, I do not want to come in with a bias. Prove to me that what you're saying is actually true. Prove it to me, right? And so that's where I'm coming from. And at first I was like, because people will say, well, he was a liar and he was, a con artist and all stuff like that. But are they just looking at his past life before he was converted? Before he actually had his experience, converting to Jesus? Like, that's what I want to know. People can change. And if your past life doesn't have to always follow you, right? That's Christianity. And so that's kind of where I was like, are they just looking at his past and he had a legitimate experience and a legitimate conversion and he actually changed after that? That's what I would want to know. What is his fruits? And I'll tell you, I actually was astounded at this man's life, that even after a Christian, the things that he did, the way that he lived, the lies that he perpetuated, and I don't understand it. It's incredible. It's really incredible. So let's get into a little bit. This is the guy that has shaped your theology and America. I just want to hammer that down. Like, we hear political people talking all the time, making decisions according to this belief. We have theological seminaries teaching this to our pastors. This is an important thing. What is everything that we are built on? And so C.I. Scofield, let's talk about him a little bit. He was born in the early, I don't know where that was, early 1800s. He fights in the Civil War. We'll get into that. And I want to just kind of walk you through his life and then actually break down the things that don't line up with the story that we're given. There's a biography of his life that you can read, but that biography does not tell the whole story. There are lots of inconsistencies. And what's that all about? He literally dictated his life story for this biography. And so let me give you the general high points. Here we go. Ready? So Civil War comes around. He's a young fellow. He's actually was born in the North, but then he came down to visit his sister in Tennessee, and Civil War breaks out, and he gets drafted into the Confederate side of the Civil War in the South, right? And he's actually not from the South. That's not actually probably the side he would have been on naturally. And he gets into it, and he doesn't want to be actually fighting in the war in the South. And there's multiple letters that he sent to his head officers asking for a discharge, wanting to get out of it. And he was in some serious battles, mind you. He was in some serious battles. There was extreme casualties, and he made it through it well. And then he actually was wounded in battle and was spent about 6 months in a hospital recovering from this. And during that time, he sent more letters asking for now a health-wise discharge. And eventually, in 1862, he got an alien friend discharge, and he was released on September 26. Remember that, 1862, right? Middle of the war. He gets discharged from that. And his life story, I'll get into this, but his life story, when he tells his actual story, he never mentions this discharge. He omits that. which is kind of crazy. So now we've got like not really stolen valor, but he did not finish the war. And later he would tell stories, and he'd go to Confederate conventions and all these things and speak and be given all these awards, when in reality he got discharged. And then in July of 1863, he registered for the Union draft in St. Louis. So not only was he discharged from the South, but he registered for the Union draft and went back to St. Louis. So he's in the South, he's fighting for the South, wants to get out, gets discharged, goes back to St. Louis and signs up for the Union draft there, but then never fights anymore after that. And yet in his biography, and for years after, even when he's a pastor, he's saying he fought the full time, and he was there when Robert E. Lee surrendered and all these things, and yet he did not fight. He lied about this, even after becoming a pastor. And I'll show some more of that. But you could say, well, this is before he was saved or whatever. So then years go on, and he actually supposedly studied for law in a law school in St. Louis there, and said that he, studied for law and whatnot. But when we go back to the records, we can't find any records of him studying for law under the person that he said he was going to. And then we actually find records that there were accusations put against him for forging documents and getting on the bar exam. That's kind of weird, so we've got a habit there. Well, that doesn't work out so well, but he does, I guess, maybe pass the bar exam. We don't know, but there was accusations against him that he forged some documents. But then he gets married to a wife. He has his wife. He eventually has 2 kids with her, and they move to Kansas. And he starts working in Kansas as an attorney, and then he actually gets appointed as the U.S. attorney in Kansas and spends some time in the government there. And this is kind of interesting. So he gets appointed as a U.S. Attorney General there in Kansas, and only after 6 months of being there, he resigns amid a scandal. There's a scandal that happens, and generally, the DOJ summary notes say that there was questionable financial transactions that happened. And when you really read it, there was some bribery going on, maybe a little blackmail going on. Questionable transactions is putting it lightly. There was a big scandal in the Kansas Senate and Congress there, and he was wrapped up in all of it, and he was part of that group. And so he actually resigns only after 6 months of being there in that job. And you know what's funny? In his life story, he says that he served 2 years and then got tired of politics and quit. So 6 months and he gets in a scandal. But when he tells his life story, he says, I got tired of politics after 2 years, which is a lie. And that lie was when he was a pastor too. So he then leaves there. He kind of travels back and forth to St. Louis and Kansas. His wife and daughters he has 2 daughters, stay in Kansas. And during this time, his wife is a Catholic, and he's kind of, I don't know what faith. He grew up in some different faiths and whatnot, but his wife's Catholic. And he leaves her there to go work in St. Louis. He's trying to make ends meet. And then he gets into another problem in St. Louis. He's scamming people in St. Louis, trying to do his whole attorney job there. And then he gets caught for forging things and thrown in jail, right? He's thrown in jail in St. Louis now. He had to resign of the U.S. Attorney General, and then he goes to St. Louis, and how do we know this? Well, there was newspaper articles written about Scofield, caught, thrown in jail. It says, U.S. Attorney General caught forging documents and conning people out of stuff, and he's thrown in jail. So we have newspaper articles showing this at this time, which is 1881, right? And then, and I will say, it's kind of funny, there's still people that are trying to research Scofield's life because it's so confusing at times. There's a fascinating essay that I read that they discovered there was a newspaper clipping that said the C.I. Scofield, who was caught forging documents and had left Kansas in a disarray of scandal, they said that they found he was living under another name. He was using a false name and possibly going down to Louisiana and doing transactions down there. And we don't really know much about this time. There's a period of time where he's traveling around in St. Louis, and in the midst of all of this, we don't know if it's before or after he gets thrown in jail, but he's using an alter ego and another name during this time. And this newspaper clipping showed that, yes, C.I. Scofield had another name and was doing business under this other name. And it's an interesting essay, but it's actually fairly recent that they found this. I'm not going to include a whole lot of that. It seems like some weird, shady things were going on there. Well, he gets thrown in jail, and right about this time, his wife kind of starts to hint at divorce because he had left them in Kansas and really hadn't heard from him much, wasn't sending them money, was supposed to be working and trying to help them out. But then he gets thrown in jail, and this is the story. The story goes that he gets thrown in jail, and this is when he has his come to Jesus moment, and he really has a real conversion in his kind of come to Jesus moment. And that's the way the story goes. So when I'm reading this, I'm like, okay, yeah, you deserted and left in the Civil War, and then you, I don't know, some questionable things with the bar exam, and then you get caught up in a scandal in Kansas, and then you come back and you're forging documents, but you have a come to Jesus moment, and maybe your life changes from here on out. And I go, I can accept that. I can totally accept that you just went down this hole, right? And there's grace for you there. But the problem that I keep seeing is even he goes and becomes a pastor, and we'll talk about all that stuff that comes about. He becomes a pastor, and when he does his biography and tells his life story, he doesn't talk about the time in the Civil War in the South that he actually left in 1682. He doesn't talk about, well, what was going on with the bar exam? What was that kind of shady stuff? He said that he served for 2 years in Kansas and got tired of politics when he actually basically got thrown out after 6 months. He doesn't talk about the alter ego, the other name. He doesn't talk about the divorce, all these things. He leaves all of this out. What's going on? You're a pastor. You're supposed to be changed. I don't know. So now I'm starting to become suspicious. This is strange. Now I'm starting to become suspicious. So in 1882, his wife puts a petition to be divorced from him, and she's under the umbrella, or whatever you want to say, of abandonment, because he wasn't sending any money, whether he wasn't helping them at all. He basically just abandoned them in Kansas. This is in March 4th of 1882. And it actually gets dismissed in St. Louis. No, not going to divorce him. It gets dismissed. But then, so C.I. Scofield has this supposed conversion and all this stuff, and he gets a preaching license there in St. Louis, and he's going to become a preacher. Well, the board in St. Louis hears that C.I. Scofield is now a preacher, and they actually suspend his preaching license because they're like, you're a criminal, right? Again, maybe there could be some grace. I don't know. But the board suspends his preaching license in July of 1882, right? Well, in August through October of 1882, he starts going down to Dallas, Texas. And he goes to Dallas and he starts preaching at a little Baptist church down there. Excuse me. And he starts preaching down there, and he doesn't mention to any of the elders of this church that he has a wife in Kansas. He doesn't even tell them that he has a wife in Kansas. and 2 kids that he's basically abandoned, that has tried to divorce him. But he's going to go preach at this Baptist church in Dallas, and he starts filling the pulpit there. And then on October 22nd, the elders ask him to become the pastor. And what's interesting in the whole life story thing and the actual records, there's even weird things that go on there. He's ordained in Dallas by the church. And in the notes of the church, it says that they had extended examination, but there were no particulars given. So when they're actually interviewing him to be pastor, it says they had extended examination of him, but there was actually no particulars given to his actual back life. But in his life story, it says that the council took up the whole question of his past life. So he said they took up the whole question of his past life. The actual meeting notes say there was no particulars given to his past life. Strange. So he becomes ordained there, and then then his wife refiles for divorce while this is all happening on October 1st. She refiles for divorce, and it is granted this time for willful abandonment. And he never told his followers, he never told his church there in Dallas about this, about his divorce, about his other family, because, here's a bit of a problem, his wife and his daughters are Catholic. And that's maybe not great that his wife and his daughters are Catholic. You abandoned them in Kansas. Then you go start preaching in Dallas. You get a divorce over here to get her out of the way. He then gets his preaching license reinstated in St. Louis. They no longer are suspended, so now he has a preaching license. And then he actually gets remarried pretty quickly to a gal down there in Dallas. So he gets divorced, he gets remarried, he gets his license back, and we kind of just forget about his wife and daughters in Kansas. Never, mind you this, he's now a pastor, he's preaching, he gets a divorce, he gets remarried, and he never goes to see his daughters again. He does send letters here and there, but he never sends them any money. He never really does anything good at all. It's kind of terrible. So, and he doesn't really disclose that he had a previous wife. He tries to keep that all a secret. Hopefully his wife that he married knew that. I don't know. And you know what? Even in their letters going back and forth, and in his wife's first petition for divorce, she says, he argued, well, I just can't live in the situation. I can't live in that house anymore. I can't live under this place. It's just terrible. And she replied in that divorce hearing, no, we're very cordial. He's never been mean to us. We've always had a good relationship, but he abandoned us. Like, he just left us. Like she said, we didn't really have any problems there, but she said he's abandoned us. So it's a bit of a problem there. All right, so now he abandons his wife in Kansas, starts preaching there, and in his biographies, he omitted or even sanitized a lot of these details. So here we go. So now we have him preaching in Dallas, remarried. He's got a new life, and he actually becomes quite successful at this new job. Says that he's very energetic, and people really like him, and they really enjoy. The church starts to grow. He does really well. He's known as a well-spoken teacher, and he starts to speak at different places. And this is kind of where he's down in the South. He's down in the Dallas area. There's Confederate soldiers, past Confederate soldiers everywhere. It's a community of them. And so he really kind of leans into the identity, yes, that I was a Confederate as well, and I fought right along with you guys, and I was there the whole time. And so he gets invited to go speak at reunion groups, and he gets times to go speak at different events for the Confederates. And in the newspapers, they love it, right? They say, oh, yes, a Confederate pastor who fought in the war, who's been alongside the men and all these things. He's now in the Dallas area, and it really gets him pretty popular. It really gets him notoriety, and his church starts to grow, and he does really well with it. Okay, so it worked well for him to take up that identity. Doesn't say that he deserted. Doesn't say that he left. Doesn't say that he reenlisted or for the draft in the Union in St. Louis. Doesn't talk about any of those things because that doesn't work well for what he's trying to do. And there's a lot of things that happen during this time. And I don't want to spend too much time. I don't want to bore you. I really just want to kind of talk about some of the discrepancies in his life. But he becomes pretty popular, and then he gets connected with D.L. Moody, and he starts to going up to D.L. Moody's conference that he has and helping out there, and he gets more and more integrated with it. He writes a couple of booklets on interpreting the word, and he's doing well. And he goes back and forth, and then there's a time that he goes up and just works with D.L. Moody and goes up to his church to help with the conference. And it does say that D.L. Moody and him actually had a falling out. We don't know. We don't have a clue. There's nothing about this. But D.L. Moody and him have this falling out. And then shortly after that is actually when D.L. Moody passed. So we don't really know what that was all about. And he's traveling around quite a bit, getting connected with some people. And, D.L. Moody was a dispensationalist. D.L. Moody came from the Brethren stream, and so he was kind of already getting educated in dispensationalism. He then begins to make some friends that are really educated on the dispensational belief. They start pouring into his life a whole lot. He really starts kind of being educated in this. There's some controversies that follow him for the rest of his life. He speaks at D.L. Moody's funeral, and the newspapers in Kansas find out about this, and there's articles printed up about him that they're saying, "Oh my gosh, C.I. Scofield, the shamed Attorney General of Kansas, the forgerer and charlatan, is now preaching and is a pastor," and they're just mad about that. And he even says that in the news article that there's still people in Kansas that he owes money to that he's never paid back, and all this stuff like that. So he has some things, but it kind of blows over and whatnot. The short of the story is we see that he becomes pretty popular in this in the conference, and then he eventually moves back to Dallas and preach and takes up preaching in the Dallas area once again. And during this time, as he says, is when he gets the idea for the Scofield Bible. And what the Scofield Bible is, it's not him changing the text, right? He doesn't change the text in the Bible a whole bunch. But what he does is it's King James Bible, and he wants to put footnotes in the actual Bible itself explaining the verses as you read it. It was the first time that had ever been done. There had been lots of commentaries, but usually it was just the Bible, and then there was a commentary on a book or something like that. But he actually wanted to write his beliefs and his interpretations of the Scriptures in the footnotes of the Scriptures. So while you're reading it, you can go down there, read the footnote, and it tells you what this verse is saying. And I'm not against that at all. I mean, there's some good books. There's some good Bibles and commentaries and footnotes and Bibles. I love it, right? But you have to understand that whatever you believe is going to come through those footnotes, and what your interpretation is of those verses is the way he's going to put in those footnotes. And so he's going to, just the believer who's just sitting there reading the Bible and goes, I wonder what that verse means. Or if you think, well, I think this is what this verse means, and then you read the footnote and it says, well, this is talking about the end times or the millennium or something, you're like, oh, okay. So it's going to really, really put a lens and an interpretation on things of the way that you do that. And so that's kind of where he gets the idea. But I do want to note of something kind of interesting. In 1885 is the earliest known time that doctor is used when describing C.I. Scofield in the Dallas Morning News. So they call him Dr. Scofield. But the thing is, he himself never says that he had any formal education nor a doctorate, right? And he never corrects this. In the very Scofield Bible, it has Doctor of Divinity given to it. And a lot of times Doctor of Divinity can be given to a person even though they haven't been educated. It can be given to somebody honorarily, right? And I get that. But there's no sources showing that any university, any organization, anything like that ever awarded him with that. So people just start putting, and maybe it wasn't him, I don't know. We can't prove that. People start putting doctor on there, and he doesn't correct them. And then even on a lot of his own sources, doctor starts showing up. Doctor of Divinity starts showing up. And there's no time that he had that education. There's no time that shows that should be true. So now he's already a pastor, he's preaching the word, and now he's lying about that he's a doctor. Doctor of Divinity, whether it was honorarily or educationally, does not show that, does not does not correct that, and actually just lets that lie continue. I'm like, come on, you're a pastor, dude. Because in 1909, in the title page of the Bible, Doctor of Divinity was used. And with what affiliations? I don't know. So, kind of problematic. But then, he then starts working on the Scofield Bible, takes a trip over to Europe, and gets connected with the Oxford University Press, works out a deal for Oxford University Press to publish the Bible. They'd never published a Bible before, so I'm told, that they had done. So it's kind of strange. Why would Oxford University Press want to publish the Scofield Bible, this whole thing? And this is where a lot of the conspiracies kind of come in, and I love a good conspiracy, mind you. But I couldn't find really any paper trail to prove these. You see a lot of things out there saying, oh yeah, the Rothschilds funded Scofield, because they were connected to Oxford University Press. Well, maybe so, but we can't find any paper trail that there was any intention for that to happen, right? And we'd say, well, Oxford University Press had all of these Zionists, and the dispensationalism helped their belief, and so they wanted to print it. Again, I can't find any paper trail. I can't find any statements. Could it be true? Could be. The belief works well with Zionist beliefs. The belief works well with that. But I can't find any journals. I can't find any statements. I can't find any paper trail. Maybe it's out there, but I haven't found it. And I can link to you. I will put in the description below the links and the footnotes to the essays and the articles that I've read giving all of this information, right? So that you can go check it all out. But I didn't find any of that. There was one guy on the board of the Oxford University Press that was kind of Zionist leaning. But the main connection of why did Oxford University Press pick up this deal? And I think the smoking gun for that is that there was a gentleman on the board of the publishing of Oxford University Press who was a self-confessed Plymouth Brethren. What does that mean? Well, he himself had the theological and eschatological beliefs of dispensationalism. He was an exclusive Brethren, and he's on the board of Oxford University Press. And so when C.I. Scofield comes and says, hey, I want to print this Bible, and it's from a dispensational viewpoint, and it's going to have footnotes on it, and this guy on the board can see that and go, well, yeah, I believe this. I want to promote this. I want more of this. And so he goes, yes. And we can see he would have a direct input in saying we should print this Bible. That doesn't seem like a hard stretch for me. We know that, we can prove that, we can show that, right? So that's not a hard stretch to be able to say that. The gentleman's name, Henry Froud, I don't know, whatever. Henry Froud or Froud. In his biography, we find that he was had the religious views of the exclusive Brethren, and he was on the Oxford University Press Board. So there you can find that connection of, well, why would Oxford University Press pick it up? Well, that's probably why. So let's kind of bring this all back together, and this is where I want to hit really at the end. This is what's really showing me this guy was not a super good dude, is the way that he treated his wife and daughters during this whole time. So he He abandons them in Kansas, goes off to St. Louis, gets in trouble, and then he decides he's going to become a pastor, and he does all this stuff, secretly divorces his wife, never sees them again. He will send letters to them periodically, but that's about it. And he's always trying to convert them because they're Catholic, and he doesn't like Catholics anymore. And so he's always, he never sends them any money. He never supports them in any way. He never helps them out. In Kansas City, and in Kansas, his wife is very well respected in the community. She's a librarian there for the rest of her life, and they say she's an amazing person. And yet he never helps them out in any way. He gets remarried. He has his own kids. He lives his own life, and he just abandons his daughters. He abandons them, and he'll send a letter every once in a while. And the funny thing is, when he finally gets the Scofield Bible printed, he sends them a copy of the Scofield Bible. And what's funny is in the Scofield Bible, it says that Catholics are basically heathens. It says that Catholics are not saved, and they're basically like pagan heathens, and they're not saved. And he sent that to his Catholic daughters and Catholic wife, which is kind of funny. But anyways, but what's crazy is when the Scofield Bible was printed, it became really popular, and he became pretty financially wealthy from the publishing of the Scofield Bible, and he still never sent anything to his daughters. And I want to read you a quote. So this is what's crazy. This just floors me that a pastor would do this, that a guy who we're supposed to be taking theology and doctrine from is acting this way. So there near the end of his life in September of 1909, he sends a letter to one of his daughters, and this is what he says. He says, "Work calls even louder, the call of the purse, which has grown dismally empty. Scofielditis, you know. I hate to gather my books and papers for so many flittlings as I seem doomed to make. When I get rich, I'm going to have 3 homes, one in a winter apartment on Washington Heights, New York City, one at Crestwood, one at Sorrento, Italy. I especially value works of reference for serious studies, my favorite books, prints, etc. I shall live in New York, November through February, Sorrento, March through May, Crestwood, June through October. Have courage, my dear. If my Scofielditis is ever healed, you shall have ease too. Your loving father, C.I. Scofield." Pretty interesting. He says, work calls louder, and the purse, money, it's always dismally empty. Because, why is it dismally empty? Scofielditis. It's his own little play on words. He says, I've got this disease. It's just that Scofield thing in me. I always got to have more stuff. I always got to spend this money. I've got Scofielditis. And then and I don't have a problem with you dreaming of having, but he has a dream of having all of these things. But he makes this promise at the end. He says, have courage, my dear daughter, who have not seen since I abandoned you. If I get over my Scofielditis and it gets healed and I have money, you won't have anything to worry about. You'll have ease too. So that means he's saying, I'll give you money too, right? Your loving father. But then when he writes his biography, he doesn't even mention his daughters in his biography. They're absent. But as he grew closer to passing away later in his life here, he actually spent more time sending letters to his daughters, and they actually sounded quite kind of apologetic of his life. And they actually conversed back and forth. And I've got to give it to the daughters. They are great people, because in their letters and even other journals, they say that they never hold any hatred towards their father. They never hold unforgiveness towards them, and they actually pray for him. So that's pretty good for them. Good Catholics. Anyways, I want to read you this. In July 24th of 1921 is when Scofield passed away. And so he makes this promise to them in that letter, right? Oh, yeah, you guys will have money too. But the affinity never abated Scofield, and he died at his Douglaston home on Sunday, July 24th of 1921, without ever making a public acknowledgement of his two daughters. In his final denial, Helen Scofield Barlow requested a copy of her father's last will and testament, only to find her name absent from the important document. She's not even in, his other daughters he abandoned are not even in the will. In the same month that Reverend Scofield pledged his love to his daughters, he also prepared his will and last testament. So the same month he's sending them a letter saying, I love you guys, and if I ever get money, you guys won't have to worry. He writes his will, and he doesn't include them in it. The will made no mention of either Abigail or Helen, that's his two daughters, but left his entire estate, including the substantial royalty payments from Oxford University Press, to his wife, Hetty Scofield, and his son, Noel Scofield. Crazy. Let me read you also this. So how much money did he get from the Scofield Bible? How much money did he get from the Scofield Bible? Well, between 1915 and 1921, Oxford University Press disclosed $76,847 in royalties paid to Scofield. So in 1915 through 1921, through from 6-year period, he got $76,847. Pretty good sum for that time, which represented an average annual income of $15,269. So a yearly income of $15,269. The average family earning of that time period was just over $1,200 in an annual income. Oh, man. So he already was getting a $1,500 annual salary from the church in Dallas. And then he got little over $15,000 a year from when he from the Oxford University Press. And most people of that time were only getting $1,200, and he was getting $15,000 a year. And he never sent a dime to his daughters. And he said, this is what's mind-blowing to me, is he's getting $15,000. Most people are only getting $1,200 of that time. That's what they're living off of. And he says, I still don't have enough money. When he sends his letter, he says, and mind you, he sent his letter in 1909, but even later on, he's saying, I've got Scofielditis. I never have enough money. I never have everything that I need. Excuse me. And then he's getting $1,500 from the church, the Baptist church in Dallas anyways. And when he dies, he doesn't even mention his two daughters in his will. He doesn't leave them a dime. That frustrates me, man. Okay? That frustrates me. So, here, let's sum it all up. What did Scofield lie about after he was a pastor? So, even after he becomes even after he supposedly has his conversion experience and he becomes a pastor and he changes his life around, he lies about his service in the Civil War. He lies about his time as a lawyer. He lies about the time that he was in as the attorney general. Oh, I did 2 years. No, you only did 6 months and you got kicked out. He lies about his maybe alter ego. He lies. He never even talks about, he omits his wife that he abandoned in Kansas. He never talks about his daughters. And then he goes to all these Civil War meetings and he gets awarded this great award for his time and his service. And he takes on this whole identity and he lies about all of that. He lies about being a doctor and he lets that get put on all sorts of documents. He lies about all these things. On his deathbed, he says, I've got Scofielditis. I never have enough money. And if you got, and he lies to his daughters saying, I'm going to help you guys out. And when he passes away, his daughters ask for the last will and testament and they're not even in it. A pastor a theologian, supposedly, a guy who has shaped the belief of America and Western Christianity, lied to his very deathbed and mistreated his wife and abandoned them and all this stuff like that. I mean, that's not good. That's not good. That tells me that some things are not right here. And we're going to believe everything that this guy taught, and we're going to base our theological beliefs. Now, mind you, I do want to say that he did not come up with dispensationalism. He did not come up with the rapture. He did not come up with these things. So you could make the argument, Anthony, you're just saying that he's guilty by association. I don't want to say that, because no, it's the same way in Christianity. We have pastors that can preach good things and they live a bad life, and we shouldn't throw out all the good things that they're saying. I get that. But what you believe should change the way that you live. And if your theological beliefs don't incline you to love your children well, I don't know if that's a good fruit coming out of your life. Should we be believing everything this man says? Should we be adopting everything that he's promoting? Like, if the eschatology and the theology of C.I. Scofield is so good, why did it not change his life? Why did it not make a difference? Why did it not influence him to be honest? And if he lied about all of these things that we can prove, what did he lie about that we don't know? What kind of other discrepancies are showing up? And also, that tells me a lot about your walk and your belief of who God is. Like, if you believe that you can stand up and preach in front of people about God and teach us about God, and also lie just constantly about your life to the very day that you die, what kind of lens are you looking at God at or with that allows you to live that way? And do I want that lens to influence the lens that when I open the Bible? You know what I mean? Like, the fruit is really important. And that's why I go, whoa, when I found this out, I'm just like, this has influenced all of our theological beliefs, our eschatology. This is what we're following. This is if it wasn't for C.I. Scofield, it wouldn't be popular. It probably would have stayed a small sect. Maybe someone else would have come along. I don't know. But you know what? Moody, yeah, he made it a little more popular, but it still didn't become widespread. But it was the Scofield Bible that did. And that's problematic to me. That's really problematic to me. It should have had a better fruit if it was true. It should have made a difference. And then what's crazy to me is Baptist Theological Seminary adopted the Scofield Bible and taught out of it pastors. Do you hear what I'm saying? A theological seminary, Dallas Theological Seminary, adopted this, and other seminaries have adopted this as well, and taught dispensationalism, taught out of the Scofield Bible, taught these things to our pastors that went into churches across America and across the world to teach this stuff from a guy who was a liar and a scoundrel for his whole life. No, was he a bad guy while he was a pastor? Well, it doesn't seem like it. It seemed like he had a pretty good life, but it seemed like he was really just trying to have notoriety. It seemed like he just wanted to have a good reputation. Over and over and over and over in his life, he had ruined his life, and he wasn't respected anywhere he went. And he finally found a thing that he could do well, and he was finally respected at it, and he kept his whole life hidden. But to just continue in lies, that's not good. That's not good. And that should influence, if it had that type of fruit in his life, what kind of fruit is it going to have in the church? And maybe that's why we have so many problems in the church, is because we've just trickled down these things. You know, there's a lot of different things. You know, Scofield also, in his Bible, talked about African Americans. And he used Genesis 9:25, that the prophetic declaration is made that Ham, the descendant of an inferior and servile posterity. So he makes, it's crazy. In the 20th century United States, the inferior and servile race usually referred to African Americans. So, and that later was edited out of Scofield's Bible. And actually, the Scofield Bible and some of the dispensations and some of those things have been shaped and changed and adjusted over time. But, Scofield himself, said, oh, well, Genesis 9:25, that's about black people. And they're a inferior and supposed to be servants, African Americans. That's what they're supposed to be. And so he used the Bible to promote racism and slavery and stuff like that. And I'm not a big racism dude. Oh, you're racist, we got to cancel you. But I am saying, man, you just use the Bible to manipulate, to believe whatever it is that's in your culture of that day. And that's what Scofield did. He used that in that same thing. So, golly, I don't know about you, but, that just makes me really lose faith in a lot of things. He lied about so many things, and then we just built our theological belief all over that. And no, I don't believe in guilty by association, but I do question the fruit of your life. If what you're teaching is truly true, man, it should have a good fruit. And you could say, well, he was teaching good things, but he just didn't believe it. Yeah, well, why? At least get rid of the Scofield Bible and research this stuff yourself and take a different path, But I'll just tell you this. So do with that as you will. You go read the articles, go read the essays that I wrote. That I read. I didn't write them. And do the research yourself. But this just really influences me a little bit. It really kind of makes me question some things. And I will say, I told you in the beginning, in the last episode, that I just grew up with dispensationalism. I just grew up with this rapture stuff. I just grew up with it. And you know what? It didn't have great fruit in my life either. It made me fearful. It made me escapist. And then it also really changed my view of who God was, of how he treated me. And when I shifted that and changed that to a more victorious route, it changed the way I saw God, and it changed the way I lived. It changed the way I loved my family. It changed the way I loved myself. It changed the way I loved the church. And it really changed the way I loved my enemies, quote unquote enemies. But they're all just lost children, And I see that it also didn't have super great fruit in Scofield's life. And so do with that as you will. Was he funded by Rothschilds and all this stuff? I can't find those roots, but just looking at a man's fruit, that's a bit of a problem. And so, in our next episode, we'll actually talk about the very beliefs, absent from the people that have been behind them, absent from Darby, absent from Scofield. Let's just look at the Bible. Let's just look at these beliefs, and let's also look at the fruits that they've had in America, in the West. Let's look at the fruits that it'll have in our lives, and the fruits, the way that we perceive and see God, and the way that you're going to live. So I appreciate you. If you made it all the way through, good for you. You're a nerd like me. You like this information. But I just pray that this helps you just to kind of go on a journey. I'm not saying that you have to change just because of this one thing, but it does help. So I just pray blessings upon you, that you would continue to go after these things, search this out in the Word, search the Lord for this, and blessings to you, and thank you very much.